What if a single kiss could change everything? Not a romantic one, but a desperate life-saving act between a maid the world refused to see and a millionaire too broken to feel. Sounds like a fairy tale turned upside down, doesn't it? Yet in the chaos of Los Angeles, destiny decided to cross two worlds that were never meant to meet. This isn't just a love story. It's a story about redemption, courage, and the price of being human. Some stories entertain you. Others change the way you see life. The story of Amara and Liam does both. From that fateful night to the moment they found forgiveness, every scene reminds us that love can rise from the ruins. So before we dive in, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because I love seeing how far these stories travel. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell, because what you're about to see will prove that one kiss really can change everything. Amara Johnson moved through the corridors of the Carter mansion with light, almost silent steps. The golden lights reflected off the marble floor as she cleaned every detail with precision. It was a night of celebration, and the sparkle of luxury contrasted sharply with the simplicity of her green uniform. The guests didn't even notice her presence. She seemed like part of the decor, a silent reflection of someone else's wealth. As she gathered glasses and crumpled napkins, Amara thought of her daughter, Zoe, waiting for her at home. The girl's smile was the fuel that kept her going, even when her body begged for rest. She dreamed of seeing her daughter study, have choices, live without the limitations that life had imposed on her. For that, she endured silence and daily humiliation, swallowing her pride in exchange for love. In that mansion, everything sparkled, but the shine had a cost. Millionaire Liam Carter was the symbol of a distant, unreachable world, surrounded by power yet suffocated by appearances. Amara watched him from afar in the mirrored walls, always accompanied, always composed. But behind those flawless suits, there was an emptiness that even luxury couldn't disguise. Somehow she sensed it, even without ever speaking to him. The hours passed slowly, and weariness blended with solitude. Amara knew well what it meant to be ignored. Every night she saw the same faces smiling, pretending to be happy while she picked up the remnants of their illusion. Luxury to her was a stage of masks, and her role was to keep the show spotless. Yet there was dignity in her work, the kind of quiet pride born from honesty and perseverance. Suddenly, something broke the rhythm of the night. A sharp noise and the shattering of glass, followed by screams coming from upstairs. Amara froze for a moment, her heart pounding. That wasn't part of the routine. Going upstairs wasn't her job, but something in the air called to her. Urgent, instinctive. She dropped the cloth and ran, not thinking, as if an invisible force were pushing her toward the unknown. At the top of the stairs, the atmosphere had changed. Silence reigned, heavy and strange. The lights were dim, the floor littered with glass shards, and the scent of alcohol and cologne hung thick in the air. Then she saw him, Liam Carter, the millionaire, lying still, pale, motionless. For a second, time seemed to stop. There he was, the man who lived at the top of the world, suddenly so human. She knelt, her hands trembling, trying to understand what to do. Panic guided her. No training, no instructions, only instinct. She moved closer, checked for breath, searched for signs of life. Nothing. Fear tightened her chest, but there was no time to hesitate. Amara did what needed to be done, driven by courage and faith, ignoring the distance between employer and employee, between millionaire and cleaning woman. The scene was pure tension. The sound of the party still echoed faintly downstairs, far from the urgency unfolding above. Every second mattered, and fate seemed to hold its breath. Amara, heart racing, fought against the inevitable, unaware that this simple act would change everything. Sometimes what separates two lives is nothing but a single act of courage, and it was right there, on the cold marble floor of the Carter mansion, that two worlds collided for the first time. The invisible woman and the unreachable man met under circumstances neither would ever forget. What happened next would not be just an isolated event. It would be the beginning of something that would transform them both forever. Silence filled the room. The lights flickered and the distant sound of the party disappeared behind the closed doors. Amara knelt beside Liam Carter, the millionaire whose pale skin revealed the fragility money couldn't protect. His body didn't move, and despair thickened the air like a heavy shadow. Her heart raced. There was no time to wait for help. Her trembling hands searched for signs of life. No movement, no breath. His still face looked like a portrait of absence itself. Amara knew she wasn't a doctor, but courage often rises when fear tries to take control. She followed her instinct, the same one that had guided her through survival, and leaned over him, ready to try the impossible. The touch was brief, urgent, real. The kiss that joined two worlds happened without conscious witnesses, yet the universe seemed to pause and watch. Air passed from one body to another, and for an instant time stood still. Then Liam, with a rough gasp, breathed again. The sound was small, but it filled the room with life. Amara pulled back, her heart pounding, caught between relief and disbelief. Soon, footsteps echoed in the hallway. The door burst open and security guards rushed in. Surveillance cameras blinked in the corners, recording everything. Liam, still dazed, tried to understand what was happening, while every gaze turned to Amara, who could barely stand. In seconds, the act of saving a life became a public scene. Words started cutting through the air like blades. She kissed him. What's that cleaning woman doing here? I call Sabrina. Chaos spread and fear returned. Amara tried to explain, but no one listened. The millionaire was breathing and alive, but the scandal had already been born there, between flashes and voices turning courage into suspicion. Amid the confusion, Liam opened his eyes, trying to make sense of what he saw. Amara's face was the first thing before him, and for a moment the millionaire truly saw the woman who had always gone unnoticed. His gaze mixed gratitude and confusion. She, however, wanted to vanish. The whole room watched, and the silence that followed felt almost painful. The next day, headlines dominated every screen. Photos and videos of the moment flooded tabloids and social media. Cleaning woman kisses millionaire boss in Los Angeles mansion. The image went viral. Versions of the story multiplied, and no one cared about the truth. Amara became the target of ridicule, insults, and judgment. Meanwhile, Liam, still recovering, tried to understand the weight of what had happened, but something inside him had shifted. Amid the noise, accusations, and flashing cameras, one memory kept resurfacing. The moment a simple woman brought him back to life. It wasn't just gratitude, it was something deeper, a quiet disturbance he couldn't shake off. Without realizing it, Amara had become the turning point in a man who believed he'd already lived everything. And while she hid from the world, ashamed and frightened, Liam stood by his hospital window, thinking about the woman who had saved him. A single unplanned kiss had become a symbol, not of scandal but of redemption. And even as the world mocked, something about that moment refused to fade, something that would soon drive him to find her again. By morning, the sun had barely risen when the scandal had already spread across the city. Headlines screamed the impossible. Cleaning woman kisses millionaire in luxury mansion. Newspapers, websites, and gossip shows replayed the same footage caught by the security cameras. The kiss that had saved a life was now portrayed as a disgrace. The world looked at Amara, but not with gratitude, with disdain. Meanwhile, Amara stayed locked inside her small home, her phone buzzing nonstop. Messages poured in like stones, insults, accusations, cruel remarks. What had been an act of courage had turned into her public sentence. Zoe, frightened, couldn't understand why everyone spoke so badly of her mother. Amara, holding her head high, tried to shield her daughter from the weight of a fame she had never wanted. Across town, Liam Carter saw his own image reflected on every screen, a mix of confusion and anger in his eyes. The millionaire, still weak, felt the sting of watching the woman who had saved him being humiliated. He tried to speak, to explain, but the story had already been written. He was the betrayed man, and she the gold digger. Lies always travel faster than truth. Sabrina Collins, his fiancée, wasted no time. With calculated elegance, she gave interviews, posed for photos, and played the role of the wounded lover. She claimed to trust Liam, but her words dripped with poison. She hinted that Amara had taken advantage of the situation, implying motives that never existed. Every phrase she spoke added fuel to the growing fire of public judgment. Carter Industries reacted swiftly. To protect the company's reputation, lawyers issued statements and the verdict came cold and official. Amara Johnson was fired. The document cited inappropriate conduct, offering no explanation, no defense. For the corporate world, the millionaire's image needed cleaning, and ironically, it was the cleaning woman who paid the price. In the following days, Amara's name became synonymous with shame among people who knew nothing about her. Neighbors whispered, Newspapers exploited every detail, and even those who once admired her now avoided her. Yet inside, something remained untouched by the scandal, her certainty that she had done what was right. That quiet conviction was her only fortress. Liam, increasingly tormented, began to isolate himself. Amara's image haunted him, not as a scandal but as salvation. He replayed the moment of the kiss in his mind, hearing her calm, steady voice echoing through his memory. For the first time, the millionaire wondered what value truly meant. And the answer no longer fit into numbers. The distance between them seemed insurmountable, yet regret grew inside him. Pride kept him silent, trapped by appearances and the weight of society's expectations. Still, there was something different in his gaze, a new restlessness that neither his wealth nor his advisors could silence. The millionaire was changing, though he didn't yet understand how deeply. While the world continued to judge, a quiet decision began to take shape. Liam Carter would, for the first time, ignore the cameras, the gossip, and the rules. He had to see her again, not to justify himself, but to thank her. And perhaps, without realizing it, to begin healing the wound his own pride had helped create. Days had passed since the scandal. Amara's name still appeared on websites and newspapers, but the noise of the media had begun to fade. She had gone back to searching for work, carrying the weight of public judgment and the worry of her daughter's future. The silence of her small home contrasted with the storm that lingered inside her. Yet in the heart of the city, someone hadn't forgotten: Liam Carter. Liam now looked at the world through different eyes. The days at the top of power seemed empty, and the luxury that surrounded him felt like a gilded cage. The memory of Amara, her courage, her composure, her gaze, followed him like a persistent echo. For the first time, the millionaire wanted to fix something money couldn't buy: dignity. And that desire drove him to do the unthinkable. He went to find her. Not with cameras or bodyguards, only with a request. When Amara opened the door, surprise froze her. Liam Carter, wearing a simple suit and a calm expression, stood before her. He apologized, not as an employer, but as a man. He said he needed to make things right and offered her a new position, this time as his personal assistant. Amara hesitated. She knew what accepting would mean, facing stares, whispers, and perhaps new humiliation. But she also knew what it meant to fight for survival. Zoe needed her strong, and this opportunity, however strange it seemed, might be the beginning of a change. After a long silence, she agreed, not out of submission, but strategy. She would return, but on her own terms. The days that followed were a clash between two worlds. Amara, now walking through luxurious offices and formal meetings, learned to navigate a universe of figures and facades. Liam watched, intrigued, as she moved with grace in spaces where she wasn't expected. She possessed something everyone around him lacked: authenticity. And little by little, that disarmed him. Their relationship began to take on a new tone. There was no longer a boss and an employee. There was respect. Liam started to see the world through her eyes. The differences, the injustices, the way people looked down on those beneath them. And Amara, though cautious, realized that the man before her was no longer the arrogant millionaire who had once collapsed in his mansion. Something inside him was changing, but where there is light, there are shadows. Sabrina Collins, upon noticing Liam's renewed closeness with the woman who had once ruined his public image, felt her control slipping away. She watched from afar, gathering information, plotting her next move. Her smile, when it appeared, was cold and calculated. The smile of someone who had already begun to play her next card. Amara, unaware, had once again become the target of a quiet storm. Meanwhile, Liam was rediscovering himself. The conversations with Amara, once brief and professional, became personal and profound. He began to listen to stories about Zoe, about her father, about a life he had never known. He discovered that strength wasn't about speaking loudly. It was about enduring in silence. In every word from Amara, he found a lesson no business mentor or book had ever taught him. And there, between the skyscrapers of Los Angeles and the wounded hearts of two people, something began to bloom. The millionaire and the cleaning woman were no longer figures from opposing worlds. They were reflections of one another. And though the past still echoed like a threat, fate seemed to stir once more, preparing the next clash between love, power, and truth. Time passed, and the bond between Amara and Liam turned routine into something unpredictable. The workplace, once defined by formality, now seemed to breathe differently. Their conversations had become more human, their silences more meaningful. He watched her closely, the way she organized papers, listened without hurry, and smiled even when tired. Her presence carried warmth, effortlessly. Amara, in turn, moved with the caution of someone who had already learned what it meant to trust and lose. She wasn't deceived by gestures of kindness, though she sensed something new in him. The millionaire who once lived behind walls of arrogance now revealed a vulnerability she hadn't expected. Still, inside her, a voice whispered not to dream again. Not this time. Their days became filled with glances that spoke louder than words. Liam began taking her to meetings, asking for her opinion, genuinely valuing what she said. Sometimes their eyes met and the air shifted, thick, charged with something neither dared to name. It was a quiet flame, almost invisible yet impossible to extinguish. One rainy evening, a corporate event changed everything. The hall gleamed beneath crystal chandeliers, and Amara stood beside Liam, officially as his assistant, but his gaze said otherwise. She wore a simple dark green dress that contrasted against the metallic tones of the room. She hadn't sought attention, yet somehow became the quiet center of it. Guests whispered. Some recognized her from the old scandal. Others simply noticed the unspoken connection between her and the host. Liam, indifferent to the murmurs, remained by her side. When Amara stumbled under the weight of old memories, he offered her his arm. A small gesture, but one that spoke of protection, respect, and something deeper. The space between them grew smaller, dangerously and inevitably so. Later that night, back at the mansion, the rain tapping against the windows set the rhythm for what was about to unfold. The tension between them had become tangible. Liam's eyes, filled with remorse and longing, met hers as he finally spoke the truth he had long avoided. He no longer loved Sabrina. The words hung in the air, heavy, raw, and liberating. Amara froze, unsure whether to believe him. Everything in her urged caution, yet her heartbeat betrayed her. He moved closer, slowly, without haste or pressure, until the distance between them vanished. The kiss this time wasn't born of desperation. It was a choice. A reunion of two souls who had once collided by chance and now sought each other by will. Outside, the storm raged on. Lightning flashed against the glass, reflecting their silhouettes as they stood entwined. There were no promises, only truth, and the echo of two hearts remembering that some loves don't need witnesses. It was a love born in silence, between guilt and redemption, between a wounded past and a healing present. But the world outside never stays asleep for long. That same night, as rain erased footprints and love was born in secrecy, hidden cameras began to wake again. What was pure and private was about to become public once more, and the quiet flames of love would soon face the storm of exposure. Dawn broke heavy, as if the city itself sensed that something was about to collapse. The rain from the night before had left a cold trail across Los Angeles, and the Carter mansion, once grand and imposing, now seemed smaller under the weight of a new scandal. The photos, the videos, the rumors, everything was spreading again. The kiss between the millionaire and the cleaning woman was no longer a secret. Amara woke to the sound of notifications flooding her phone. On every screen, her face appeared again. What had once been seen as an act of courage, later as compassion, was now treated as a joke. The woman who seduced her boss, the headlines mocked. The pain wasn't just in the exposure. It was in the betrayal of believing she could start over. Zoe, seeing it all, cried quietly. Amara held her, trying to hide her own fear. Across the city, Liam was facing a storm inside his own home. The Carter Industries board had called an emergency meeting. The atmosphere was tense, unforgiving. The images of the kiss were everywhere, and investors were demanding immediate action. The company's reputation was at risk, and for the first time, Liam had no defense. The love born in silence now demanded its price. Sabrina Collins, cold and precise, saw her moment to strike. She entered the boardroom like a queen who already knew her victory was inevitable. She presented documents, dropped insinuations, and amid disapproving stares feigned concern. She spoke of reputation, public image, and impulsive decisions. Beneath her polished tone, she sealed Liam's fate. The board voted to suspend him from his position. The news spread like wildfire. The millionaire had fallen, not from bankruptcy, but from love. The media treated it as both tragedy and entertainment. Liam, isolated, wandered through the halls of his own home, haunted by silence. Everything that once defined his power now felt meaningless. The mansion, once a symbol of success, had become an echo of loneliness. Amara tried to disappear. She turned off her phone, left the apartment with Zoe, and drove away without a destination. Every street seemed to watch her. Every stranger's face carried judgment. The scandal had destroyed not only her reputation, but her peace. In her daughter's eyes, she saw the question that hurt the most. Why? And there was no answer that could make sense. The following days were long and gray. Liam, now suspended, lived in seclusion. He avoided interviews, ignored calls, and refused to blame Amara. Silence became his armor as he tried to understand how someone once so powerful could feel so small. Deep down, he knew she wasn't the reason for his downfall. He was for taking too long to choose what truly mattered. Sabrina, meanwhile, savored her victory. Her public image remained intact and her revenge felt complete. Yet beneath her calm exterior, unease lingered. A sense that the past wasn't finished with her. In her office, staring at the skyline of Los Angeles, she convinced herself she had won. But power is never permanent when truth begins to move. Far away, Liam found a small object wedged between the couch cushions. A necklace. He recognized it immediately. Zoe's. Inside, a tiny worn photo, and an envelope bearing Amara's name. The trembling handwriting suggested urgency. Inside was a letter. The words he was about to read would change everything. The past, long buried, was about to rise. And with it, secrets that would shatter not just empires, but illusions. Liam held the envelope between his fingers as if afraid of what he was about to uncover. The paper, yellowed and carefully folded, felt old and almost sacred. Amara's name was written by hand, the letters firm but trembling at the edges. When he opened it, the sound of the paper tearing through the silence filled the room, and for a brief moment, time itself seemed to stop. Inside, there was a letter and an old photograph. The first lines were simple, yet they carried the weight of decades. It was written in the handwriting of Amara's father. He spoke of loyalty, injustice, and fear. He revealed that he had uncovered a multi-million-dollar fraud inside Carter Industries, and that when he tried to stop it, he was threatened. Liam read the words aloud, each one cutting deeper than the last. His heartbeat quickened, not from anger, but from shame. The document revealed that Amara's father had been the real hero, the man who tried to protect the company and paid for it with his life. The letter explained that he had died in a work accident staged to silence him. The Carter name, the same one Liam had carried with pride, was stained. He now realized he wasn't the heir to a fortune, but to a legacy of guilt. Liam placed both hands on the table, his eyes lost in disbelief. Everything he had ever believed about his family crumbled before him. His father, Robert Carter, wasn't just a stern man. He was an accomplice in a lie that had destroyed lives. Suddenly, the millionaire everyone envied felt small, and the name Amara Johnson came to mean more than love, and it meant truth. Meanwhile, in a small cafe by the sea, Amara was trying to rebuild what was left of her life. The cleaning uniform had been replaced by a simple apron, and her shy smile hid the fresh scars of humiliation. Zoe studied quietly in the corner while her mother served coffee with the same gentle grace as always. Life had found a fragile rhythm of peace, though the past still lingered in her eyes. One afternoon, the cafe door opened. Liam walked in. No suit, no guards, just the letter in his hand. The sound of the small bell above the door made Amara turn, and for a moment, the world seemed to fall silent. She recognized that look, the same lost eyes as before, but now filled with something new. Remorse. He walked toward her slowly, as if carrying the weight of overdue truth. When he handed her the letter, his hands trembled. Amara read it silently, tears forming with every line. It was the end of one story, and the beginning of another. The past, once clouded, now made perfect, painful sense, and for the first time, Liam understood what justice really was. Not the kind bought with money, but the kind born from forgiveness and the courage to face one's own name. They sat together, saying nothing for several long minutes. The sound of the waves crashing against the rocks was the only voice in the room. There were no accusations, only understanding. The millionaire and the cleaning woman, two opposite worlds bound by a tragedy inherited and a truth finally set free. Their shared pain had become connection. What was once an abyss was now a bridge, but not everyone would allow that peace to last. As Amara folded the letter and pressed it against her chest, Liam looked out the window. A black car was parked across the street, engine running. Inside, a familiar silhouette, Sabrina Collins. The past, it seemed, refused to stay buried, and the truth, now revealed, was about to bring consequences neither of them could yet imagine. The waves crashed against the rocks of Santa Monica with the same steady rhythm that carried Amara's mornings. Life there was simple, almost silent, and for a while she believed the past had finally let her go. Between the aroma of coffee and Zoe's shy laughter, the world seemed to have settled again, until one day he returned, not the arrogant millionaire, but a man stripped of power, seeking redemption. Liam Carter entered the cafe with the calm expression of someone who had finally learned the value of truth. He dressed simply, a light shirt, brown pants, no watch, no accessories. When his eyes met Amara's, there was no longer a barrier between employer and employee. There were only two human beings marked by mistakes and courage. His apology wasn't born of politeness, but of understanding. Real, heavy understanding. Amara listened quietly. Her eyes, steady and deep, reflected a mix of caution and compassion. The pride life had taught her now served as both armor and anchor. She couldn't forget what had happened, but she could recognize that the man standing before her was no longer the same. Liam no longer spoke like a Carter. He spoke like someone who had learned to lose, and in losing had found himself. When he asked to sit, Amara hesitated. There was an old fear there, the fear of reopening wounds. But life often takes us back to the same places just to prove we've changed. She nodded slightly, and they sat across from each other at a worn wooden table surrounded by the scent of fresh coffee and the distant hum of the ocean. The past lingered in the air but no longer held the same power. Liam explained that he had begun investigating the case that had destroyed Amara's father. With the help of an independent journalist, he was gathering evidence that could expose the Carter Industries crimes. For the first time, the Carter name would be used not to hide the truth, but to reveal it. Amara listened closely, her heartbeat quickening. The story she had carried all her life was finally being told. She turned toward the horizon where sunlight shimmered over the waves. For a brief moment, she thought of her father, of how he used to say that truth has its own timing. That time had finally come. "If we're going to do this," she said firmly, "we do it together." Liam nodded in silence. The millionaire and the cleaning woman, now partners in something greater than love, justice. The next day was filled with movement. Liam and Amara met with Michael Reyes, the determined, ethical journalist unafraid to face the powerful. In a small, dimly lit office with flickering lamps, they laid out their plan, reviewed files, and organized the evidence. Each page uncovered another layer of corruption, fraud, threats, payoffs. The Carter Empire was beginning to crumble from within. As the trio worked, the outside world carried on unaware. But something new was being built there. Liam still bore the weight of his last name, but now he carried it differently, as a scar that reminded him of what he had overcome. Amara, watching his quiet resolve, understood that forgiveness was its own form of courage. And Zoe, seeing her mother smile again, realized that starting over doesn't mean forgetting, it means rewriting. But calm never lasts long when dangerous truths are involved. As they left the office that evening, Amara noticed a car parked at the corner, the same black one she had seen days before. The tinted windows reflected the streetlights, but she could feel the eyes watching. The past was still out there waiting, and the story they were about to reveal would come at a price. The beginning of the end had just begun. The news of the investigation spread faster than anyone had expected. Small blogs began publishing rumors about irregularities within Carter Industries, and within days, the major outlets picked up the story. Amara and Liam became the center of a new storm. But this time the game was far more dangerous because power, when cornered, doesn't apologize. It deceives. Sabrina Collins watched her empire start to crumble. Sitting in her luxurious penthouse, she studied the headlines with a glass of red wine in hand. Her reflection in the window showed a poised woman, but her eyes burned with fury. She couldn't bear to lose. Not her status, not her control, and certainly not her narrative. So she made her choice. If she couldn't win with truth, she would win with lies. Days later, documents began circulating online. Alleged confidential reports claimed that Amara had embezzled funds from the company while working as Liam's assistant. The headlines were ruthless. The maid who tricked the millionaire. And people believed it because lies, when well told, often sound far more comfortable than truth. Once again, Amara was the target. Zoe cried as she watched her mother being dragged through the media. "Why are they doing this to you?" she asked. Amara didn't answer. She just held her daughter tightly, trying to steady her trembling hands. Liam, meanwhile, watched from a distance, torn between guilt and rage. He knew it was Sabrina's doing. But he also knew this time, running wasn't an option. It was time to choose between reputation and love. At a press conference, every camera turned toward him. The room was full. Flashes burst like lightning in a storm. Liam stepped up to the microphone, his hands shaking slightly. He took a deep breath and said, "The woman you're trying to destroy is the reason I still believe in humanity." The silence that followed was louder than any applause could ever be. He went on to tell everything. He spoke of the frauds, the letter, and the dark legacy his family had built. He declared Amara innocent and publicly renounced the Carter inheritance. The crowd was divided, and some applauded, others condemned him. But for the first time, Liam Carter was free. Behind the cameras, Amara watched in tears, her face glowing with quiet pride. Sabrina, watching the speech on television, hurled her wine glass against the wall. Her flawless facade was starting to crack. Consumed by rage, she decided to reveal what she had kept hidden for years. She called a journalist and scheduled an exclusive interview. The world would hear her version, uttered not out of remorse but revenge, and what she was about to reveal would change everything. The next day, the story exploded. Sabrina went live on national television and confessed that her father had worked with Robert Carter to orchestrate massive corporate fraud, and that Amara's father had been killed to cover it up. But in a final act of cruelty, she hinted that Liam and Amara were using the scandal for personal gain. Truth and lies now danced together, blurring every line. Liam and Amara sat side by side, watching the interview in silence. The room was dark, lit only by the pale blue glow of the TV screen. The revelation was devastating, not just for what it exposed, but for the danger it brought. Amara turned off the television slowly, looked at Liam, and said quietly, "So that's it. The truth is out there now, and all we can do is survive it." Truth, when it finally surfaces, rarely arrives quietly. It screams. And that day, the entire world heard it. Sabrina's confession opened an abyss no one could ignore. The Carter Empire, once a symbol of elegance and power, was now collapsing in front of everyone's eyes. But behind the chaos, a darker story was waiting to be unearthed, one that tied them all together. Liam didn't sleep. He spent the entire night awake, reading documents, cross-referencing names and dates, piecing together fragments that once seemed meaningless. With every discovery, the weight of his inheritance grew heavier. What his father had built was a castle of secrets on foundations of deceit. And among those lies, Amara's name reappeared, not as a shadow, but as a voice demanding justice. Across town, Amara Johnson, a 35-year-old black woman with radiant ebony skin, dark honey-colored eyes, and natural curls pinned in a simple bun, stood by her window gazing at the horizon. The sun rose over Los Angeles, but its light felt muted, filtered through the heaviness of what she had learned. She knew Sabrina's confession wasn't the full truth. There was still more buried, and courage would be the only key. And courage, she knew, doesn't come when you're ready. It comes when you have no other choice. Liam met with Michael Reyes, the journalist who had helped them gather the evidence. In a narrow office lined with stacks of papers and dusty cassette recordings, the three of them sat together. Amara kept her eyes fixed on the folder before her as Michael opened a sealed file that had been hidden for years. Inside was a confidential report detailing how her father had been killed in a secret operation meant to protect Robert Carter and Sabrina's father. The silence was heavy, suffocating. Liam drew a long breath, closed his eyes, and ran his hands over his face. For the first time, he understood that the past wasn't a ghost. It was a cycle waiting to be broken. And he knew who had to break it. "We're going to tell everything," he said, voice steady. Amara met his gaze, her eyes glistening, and replied, "Even if it destroys us." He nodded. Truth had a price, and they were ready to pay it. From that moment, there was no turning back. Michael contacted an independent investigative network. Together, they planned a full exposé, with documents, recordings, and testimony. It would be the end of the Carter Empire, and the beginning of something new. But as they prepared the report, strange things began happening. Unfamiliar cars tailing them. Anonymous calls. The danger had returned. One rainy night, the trio left the newsroom. The streets were empty, neon lights reflecting in puddles along the asphalt. Then, when the screech of tires, a black car sped toward them. Everything slowed. Liam shouted Amara's name. She turned, and in the next instant, the sound of impact shattered the night. Her body fell into his arms. Rain mixed with blood washing across the pavement. Michael ran for help while Liam pressed his hands against the wound, desperate. "Stay with me, please," he whispered, his voice breaking. Amara opened her eyes for a brief moment, touched his face and murmured, "Just like before, I saved you again." Then silence swallowed everything. Sirens pierced the night. The car was gone. The assailant, faceless. Liam stayed kneeling in the rain, holding her uniform, now stained red, in his hands. It was the same green uniform she had worn the first day he saw her. And in that moment, the millionaire finally understood. True love isn't about rising together, but about the willingness to fall for one another. The past was buried at last, along with everything he once was. The hospital was silent except for the rhythmic beeping of the monitors. Liam sat beside the bed, motionless as if his own breath depended on hers. Amara was alive, and barely but alive. The cold light reflected off her skin, and her green uniform, now clean, lay neatly folded on a chair. To him, that piece of fabric wasn't just clothing. It was a symbol of her strength and of the love he had finally come to understand. Days passed and the city remained in turmoil. The revelations about Carter Industries dominated every headline. Robert Carter, the patriarch, had been exposed and arrested, along with Sabrina's accomplices. The same elite that once watched from their golden balconies now hid their faces. The empire had crumbled, not under poverty, but under the weight of its own corruption. Liam, now free from his inheritance and family name, spent every moment by Amara's side. He read to her, spoke to her even when she slept. His words were simple, filled with regret and tenderness. Sometimes he held her hand and silently promised that if she woke up, everything would be different. In that hospital room, the millionaire disappeared, and in his place, a man was born. When Amara opened her eyes, time itself seemed to stop. The first face she saw was his, tear-streaked, trembling with relief. The physical pain still pulsed through her, but something inside her was finally at peace. For the first time, the past no longer felt like a prison, but a bridge. Liam cupped her face and whispered softly, "I won't let you go again." And she believed him. The days that followed were days of rebirth. Amara learned to walk again, to laugh again, to breathe without fear. Liam, always by her side, learned to live with purpose. Their love, once bound by guilt, now blossomed in freedom. Zoe watched them and smiled, as if she understood that life sometimes has to shatter everything before rebuilding what truly matters. Meanwhile, Sabrina faced her trial. Dressed in black without makeup, she looked like a shadow of her former self. When her eyes met Amara's in the courtroom, there was no hatred, only the quiet recognition that truth always collects its debt. Sabrina was sentenced, and in that moment, Amara realized that forgiveness isn't weakness and it's freedom. As she left the courthouse, Amara took a deep breath. The soft wind brushed her face, whispering of new beginnings. Liam walked beside her, simple, calm, changed. He had sold what remained of his wealth and invested in something different, an honest life. The man who once bought the world was now learning to build something money could never buy: dignity. Months later, Zoe invited him for dinner. The table was small, but laughter filled the room. Amara looked at the two people she loved most and felt at last that the past had healed. Liam knelt before her. No expensive ring, no cameras, only love. "I don't want to fix what happened," he said. "I want to start again. With you." She smiled, and the silence became the answer. Their joined hands spoke the words their hearts already knew. Outside, the golden sunset painted the sky in shades of hope. And inside that humble home, the maid and the former millionaire proved that true wealth was never about what you own, but what you choose to love, even after the pain. The sea breathed calmly that late afternoon, and the wind carried the salty perfume of waves breaking gently against the rocks. Amara, dressed in a simple white gown, gazed at the horizon as if watching a new chapter about to begin. Around her, only a few guests, just the essential ones. No luxury, no opulence. The scene was pure, sincere, almost sacred. Liam stood before her, barefoot on the cool sand, his eyes fixed on her as though he still couldn't believe it was real. His beige suit swayed lightly with the breeze, hair tousled by the wind, and on his face, peace. The man who had once been called a millionaire now seemed like someone else entirely, free, human, whole. When he smiled, the sunlight shimmered in his eyes, and for a moment everything around them fell silent. Zoe, in a soft yellow dress and wearing her grandfather's pendant around her neck, walked toward them carrying the rings. Her smile was a blend of pride and innocence. Amara knelt to meet her, and the two embraced for a moment that seemed eternal. That necklace, once a symbol of loss, now gleamed as a reminder that love is the force that transforms even scars into light. The sound of waves mingled with soft laughter from the few friends gathered there. The breeze played with Amara's curls, and her dress flowed as if dancing with the wind. Liam took her hands and whispered something only she could hear. Her gaze answered without words. It was the kind of love that doesn't need promises, only presence. When the officiant pronounced the final yes, the world seemed to stop. Their kiss, simple, calm, was the same one that had started everything, but now without fear, shame, or boundaries. Applause rippled through the air, and Zoe was the first to run and embrace them. The ocean clapped with them, its rhythm steady and timeless, as if recognizing the courage of those who still choose love after pain. After the ceremony, a small table was set beneath hanging lights strung between two palm trees. Simple dishes, hand-picked flowers, gentle music in the background. Amara raised her glass, not to romance, but to the love that rebuilds, the kind that's born when everything seems lost. Liam looked at her with gratitude, and for a second, the entire past felt like nothing more than a distant echo. Months later, Amara inaugurated a non-profit for working women. The green uniform, once a mark of servitude, became a symbol of dignity and rebirth. She spoke before a crowd of women about courage, perseverance, and hope. Liam watched quietly from the back, holding Zoe's hand. The girl filmed everything with the old camera she had inherited from journalist Michael. Because telling the truth, too, was an act of love. The organization's name was simple: Roots of Hope. There, the maid who was once invisible had become a beacon, and the man who once lived chained to power had learned that to serve is the greatest privilege. Together they rewrote the meaning of wealth, not as accumulation, but as giving, building, and believing that love is the only investment that never fails. As the sun set over the beach, the sky turned to shades of gold and violet. Amara and Liam stood hand in hand, watching the sea as if in gratitude. And in that silence they knew. The kiss that began as an act of desperation had become the symbol of a love that healed wounds, defied fate, and transformed lives. The love that truly changed everything. What if a single kiss could change everything? Not a romantic one, but a desperate life-saving act between a maid the world refused to see and a millionaire too broken to feel. Sounds like a fairy tale turned upside down, doesn't it? Yet in the chaos of Los Angeles, destiny decided to cross two worlds that were never meant to meet. This isn't just a love story. It's a story about redemption, courage, and the price of being human. Some stories entertain you. Others change the way you see life. The story of Amara and Liam does both. From that fateful night to the moment they found forgiveness, every scene reminds us that love can rise from the ruins. So before we dive in, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because I love seeing how far these stories travel. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell, because what you're about to see will prove that one kiss really can change everything.